Alafia. I'm Dr. Gloria Latimore-Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3o Art of Life show. And I am here with a show called Wisdom Poetry with a person whose nickname is Wisdom. And it's a wonderful thing that her nickname is Wisdom because a guest that I had on a previous show, whose name is Joseph Ben Levy, pointed out that wisdom is a female word, and consequently it is a wonderful thing to have a female who has understood that well enough to have her name be Wisdom. But her given name is Tina Battle, and she's a native of Chicago's South Side. She has used poetry as the foundation of her writing since the age of 8. As the winner of several city and statewide writing contests, she was named Poet Laureate of Alexander Dumas Elementary School by the age of 11, and soon began to use performance as a means of displaying her writing skills. By age 17, she had piloted 5 plays as writer, director, and actress. Today, she is one of the Chicago's most sought-after traveling poets, spoken word artists. She was a featured poet in a Chicago promotion of Russell Simmons' Def Poetry Jam, and has performed with world-renowned poets such as the Last Poets, Sonia Sanchez and Gwendolyn Brooks. Her exposure as the poet named Wisdom began during the tenure of Rituals, a poetry venue in Chicago's South Loop. She is also known for enlightening poems such as I Know Your Story, Ain't Nothing Like a Brother, If I Could Not Be Black, and Get Your Hand Out of His Pocket, all of which urge listeners to acknowledge the corruption caused by the history of enslavement and recognize the strength struggle rewards. In her poem, The Last Poets, she pays tribute to the poets of the 70s and stresses the connection between traditional poet and hip-hop. A graduate of Columbia College, Chicago, she earned a degree in professional writing and journalism and has been published in the Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times, and Chicago Defender. She has a professional background in communications and recently appeared in the theatrical production of And Then There Was Poetry by Naima Dawson, and Trippin' on Black History, a television show featuring poet Malik Youssef and comedians Damon Williams, Dean Cole, B. Cole, Leon Rogers, and Tony Schofield. Please welcome Tina Battle.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to meet you. As I told you before, you were actually recommended to me by Baba Prince, Dr. John F. Price. He had been with you and he had heard you recite some of your poetry, which he told me brought tears to his eyes. And of course, just to know that there was someone on this planet who understood that poetry was more than roses are red, violets are blue, something that rhymes and just gets people's attention, but does not carry a message, does not uplift us or instruct us, is just so refreshing. How did you start doing poetry? I know that you say you started as a writer, but why? Why this particular idiom?
Well, I started doing poetry in elementary school, as you said, and one of the things, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and I grew up in the Chicago public school system, and I have to say that writing is what changed my life. As when I was in the 6th grade, we had a poetry contest. Actually, it was a poetry assignment in which we had to write a poem about Martin Luther King Jr. And our librarian gave us the assignment, and she had all of us write poems, and she liked my poem so much that she put it on this big, construction paper and put it outside the library door. And when I walked up and I saw it, it just changed my life. It made me understand the power of words. And she came to me and she said to me, whatever you do, I don't want you to ever stop writing. And it was a poem about Martin Luther King and his journey for peace. And at the time I was about 11 years old. And that inspired, first of all, it made me understand the power of the word, because here I was, a child who had touched an adult through words. And then I learned, at that time, I learned that poetry, I'm glad you said roses are red and violets are blue, because a lot of people see poetry as just that. But poetry is so much more than that. And for black folks especially, creative expression is something that we cannot take for granted, because creative expression is our media. The spoken word, being able to get on a microphone and do a poem and express what I feel about a certain issue is something I couldn't do necessarily on the evening news. It's our platform. It's our media. It's our 10 o'clock news, if you will. And I think I learned early on that the arts, and it's so sad that now the arts are starting to be questionable as far as whether or not there's going to be funding in the Chicago public school system. That's ridiculous to me, because then where do you go? You know, during the times where I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I would call myself a village child. I was raised by uncles and aunts and grandparents, and everyone had a hand in my upbringing. But there, you know, it's difficult growing up as a black child, especially on the south side of Chicago. And that's where I went. I went to poetry. I went to the arts. I went to writing, and that's where I found myself. And that's where I found my voice. And I think that is so important that we teach our young children that you do have a voice. And your voice is your voice. It does not have to be molded by anything except for what comes from you and what comes from your heart.
May I say that when, as a little girl, it was customary in the rural South and later in the urban South where I grew up, to give children a piece to recite on special programs around holidays. And it always had to do with poetry. And you had to stand and you had to recite your piece, you know, by heart, as they said.
That's right.
So your memory was trained, and your ear was trained, and your love for words was encouraged, reinforced. And then later on, when I was in elementary school, because I'm a South Sider too, and when I was in elementary school on Chicago's South Side, we had teachers who taught us, for example, the poetry of Paul Laurence Dunbar, the literature of Dumas, the literature of Langston Hughes and his poetry. We didn't need funding. Our teachers made that a part of the curriculum. And we were, one of our teachers, or G. Morrow, used to take some of us to various churches to perform. I don't think there was any money involved. But we would go and we would perform. I used to do In the Morning by Paul Laurence Dunbar, Lias, Bless the Lord. And I still like to remember those days when we were going from church to church, sometimes singing, which is another form of poetry, and sometimes reciting poetry. This is good. Expression is good for the soul, and it's especially good for children. And for you to have found your voice so early is such a blessing, because now you have developed your gift and you have continued to do this. So have you published some of your writing in poetry form, or just your plays?
Well, I've started, actually the school that I went to, Alexander Dumas on the South Side, was very encouraging of writing, and one of the things they did was show us how to publish our work. Early on, at the time, Urban Gateways, and Urban Gateways is still around, but Urban Gateways would come around to the schools, and they taught us how to publish our work, which was another aspect of raising the self-esteem of young children at the time, because not only were you writing your own work, but it was being put inside of a book with your name on it. And so it taught me that the possibilities are endless, that there's a book on the shelf and it's not that far removed from you actually putting a book on that shelf. You know, so and yes, I self-publish my own poetry, and when I do poetry shows, I sell copies of it. And I've done a lot through my plays. I've done a lot of publishing through my plays.
Okay, so I have to have a copy of something.
Okay,
all right,
absolutely.
Okay. Well, I want you to recite some poetry. I want you to recite as much poetry as you like, or as little, because I too want to have the pleasure of hearing you. Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start with a poem I call If I Could Not Be Black. And growing up on the south side of Chicago, or just anywhere in this world practically, it's always taught that being black is not necessarily a positive thing. And so one of the things I challenge myself to do, especially if I'm going to use the name wisdom, is to focus on the positive attributes of being black. And so the piece goes, I've been through storms. You know, I've been startled by lightning and shaken by thunder. But what it would be like if I could not be black, I wonder. I've been cold. Hell, I've spent winters in Chi-Town, chills to the bone, standing on dark corners waiting for slow buses to arrive. But if I were told today that I could not be black, how then would I survive? I've cried because my heart was broke. I've shed tears out of frustration, disgusted with racism and stereotypes, tired of playing the corporate game. But if I did not possess the strength that comes with being black, how then would I stay sane? I'd be like a flower without rain, a student without a brain, a pimp without game. I'd be lost. Tell me how much and I'll pay the cost to keep my black. And if my money is short, I'll just drop my pride and beg for it back. See, I need my black. I don't know about you, but if I could not be black, I'd be blue. If I could not be black like you, I'd be green with envy. Because see, that soul that lies in you would not be in me. And whether you get public aid or a salary, it wouldn't matter to me because I'd admire your ability to appear confident with no doubt. If I were born anything but black, I'd be a sellout. If I could not make love the way black folks make love, you know, with that intensity that relieves black stress, oh yes, I'd be a mess. If I could not play basketball or master any sport that I choose, not because sports are all I know and the only thing that will please me, but because I do so well at surviving in reality, a game is easy. See, I am black and black is me, so if I could not be black, I could not be. Take away my freedom, but leave my black alone, and I'll still be free. Take away my car, my credit cards, my clothes, but please let me keep my black nose. Let me keep my soul. You can curse me, deny me, like me or not, but don't take my black. It's all I've got. Leave me naked in a dark, empty room if you like. Just leave me a pen and paper so I can write about being black. Like Tina told Ike, he can have everything, just let her keep her name. But I feel the same. Let me keep my black and we'll leave it at that. You've heard it before, it's a black thing you wouldn't understand now. What if I could not be among those who understood? If I could not hang out in the hood, where would I go? How would I know? How would I know that if you've got 2 slices of bread and some mayonnaise, you've got a sandwich? See, coming up hard is hard, but I think I can handle it because in those doubtful moments, being black has got my back. My black keeps me going. If I could not be black in the summertime when my skin glows at its best, if I could not go to cookouts and family reunions and see my aunties who bring my cousins by the dozen and my uncle who schools me when school is out and my grandmother who has seen and knows everything. See, I'll live in the ghetto. I'll live in Africa. Hell, I'll even live in Arizona. I'll live anywhere as long as my kinfolks are there. So let the blood of kings and queens remain in my veins and the blood of slaves, because I'm not ashamed of my past of being an outcast. So let the blood of Nefertiti and Harriet remain in my veins, the blood of Pharaohs and Frederick, or I'll go insane. Like Michael Jackson. See, I know that being black can be taxing, but Mike, you got the money to pay all our bills, so what's your excuse? But don't let Mike loose when he gets black. When he gets black, get back. When Mike gets black, he dances. He dances with purpose and intensity as if he's been released from some cage. See, I don't care what color he paints his face. When I witnessed Motown 25, I knew that was a black man on stage. And I was proud. Me and the rest of the black nations, we were proud to say that Mike was one of ours. And that is why Mike is filthy rich to this day. But for some reason, his black is the one thing he chooses to hide. But Mike, if you were not black enough to dance like that, you wouldn't have a dime. If being black is a crime, then sentence me to life and I'll gladly do my time. If being black is wrong, then I don't want to be right because ain't nothing wrong with the way I sing a song. I sing and make even old souls burning with hate love me and realize they were never above me. So you can have this entire world, just let me keep my music or I might lose it. See, I'm like Aretha. I don't need no doctor filling me up with all those pills. I don't need psychiatrists and psychologists telling me what my problem is. I just turn on some Marvin Gaye. See how he handles his. When they try to put shame to my black, all I can do is feel sorry for them because they don't know what they're missing. Listen to Tupac Shakur. If you can see beyond his thug life, I'm sure you'll feel him as he reminisces on his childhood being black. Pac says, I remember Marvin Gaye used to sing to me. He had me feeling like black was the thing to be. And suddenly the ghetto didn't seem so tough. Although we had it rough, we always had enough. The ghetto child grew up. Yes, I've got bills, but if I could not have been a black child, where would I have gotten my survival skill? If I could not have known the little black boy who faced the world like a soldier, you know, that little black boy who had the world on his shoulders, but he carried it proud and stood up straight even though it was weighing his little body down. If I could not have been that little black girl who went to an all-white school where they stared and asked while squinching their faces, how did you get those French braids in your hair? And after they were done with the fascination, called her a nigger. I figure it made her stronger, and I no longer have to explain my hair or my wear. Now when they ask about my style and how I got to be so tough and how I learned to play double dutch, I say from being black, and that says enough. They say the hard times help you appreciate the good times. Well, sometimes times get real hard, and so I hang out with some of my black friends and we play a little cards, and out the window goes that wish to be anything other than black. And no matter how rich I may get, see, I can never get too paid. I'll sip on a little Dom Perignon, but there'll always be a part of me that needs Kool-Aid. Because I've been through storms. See, I've been startled by lightning and shaken by thunder, but what it would be like if I could not be black, I wonder. I'd be like a flower without rain, a student without a brain, a pimp without game. I'd be lost. Tell me how much and I'll pay the cost. Because if I were not black, I don't know how I survive. If I could not be black, I think I'd die and come back black. And that's that piece. That's the first piece.
Oh, boy, that's breathtaking. That's awesome. That's
Thank you.
wonderful. You know, I'm just sitting here so proud to be black. but I've been proud to be black for as many years as I've known that I was. I've had everybody looking for a poem that nobody can find, and I just don't understand why it couldn't be found. But a poem that was we actually were required to learn by memory when I was in going to Francis E. Willard School, a school that has been replaced, I'm told, by townhouses at this point on Chicago's South Side. But it's a poem called I Am a Negro. And I don't remember all the lines, but I do remember the first part of it. And if any of my listeners can help me find this poem, because I'm sending everybody out to look for it, because it kind of reminds me of your If I Could Not Be Black. And it goes, I am a Negro. I offer no apologies for my race or for my color. I am proud of my people now, in the past, and for the future. I am proud of my slave heritage, for slavery made my people strong. And it goes on like that. And you talking about everybody learned it, and everybody would hop up and recite it on the playground during recess. I mean, we were so happy to have that poem, because if you understand the era during which I was raised, it was not, Negro was spelled with a lowercase n. And consequently, we took it upon ourselves to capitalize it. We took it upon ourselves to be black and proud when nobody was proud of anybody any people of color, you know. And so whenever we went to the Hall Branch Library, which is still at 48th and Michigan, we would go there and learn black history and come back and have to give our black, well, they were Negro history reports. We'd have to learn Negro history and give our Negro history reports. They were mostly biographies of black people, most of whom we didn't get a chance to know because they had lived before our time, but a few we did. And the thing was that we were proud to be black, and we were proud to be related to these people who had just soared, you know, in their achievements. They were the first and foremost in everything, despite all of the baggage that we had to carry, despite chattel slavery, despite the kidnap of our people from our native shores. You know, despite all, as you say, no matter what we went through, it was our blackness that strengthened us and enabled us to endure.
We did because we weren't. We did it in spite of it, and we did it because of it. There's a poet, local poet in Chicago by the name of J. Ivy, and in one of his poems he says, they say I can't, so I must. And that's exactly what drives us. And when you look at just all across the board, anything they let us in on, we end up taking it over and becoming the best at it. And it's just when somebody tells you you can't do something, then that's all the more reason to do it.
Well, I finally figured out what the underpinning of racism was. It was not that they really believed black people were inferior. It was that they knew that black people were not inferior, and so they excluded us from all these arenas so that we could not demonstrate that this notion of inferiority was a lie. Because whenever the door opened, no matter what game we played, no matter what songs we sang, there was nothing that black people didn't excel at. And so, you know, the badge of inferiority was just a hoax that a lot of black people internalized, unfortunately. But some of us survived, and some of us survived enough to encourage others of us to embrace our blackness and be very proud of this gift. One of my spiritual mentors, Bhagwan Ra Africa, talks about our being, we're in a vehicle that is the Rolls Royce. You know, you traveling around here in a Rolls Royce, your blackness gives you that, you know. And that is not to say that people who are of different shades and do not have their own gifts, but it is something that we have to embrace, because what we are has been denigrated, it's been stereotyped, it's been degraded, you know. So we're going to stick out our chests.
That's right.
You know, and let you know that, you know, our heads are bloodied but unbowed. And I'm happy that you're here.
That's right.
Okay. Do you want to go again?
Well, I guess, I just want to talk a little bit about the spoken word and how it's evolved over the years. Poetry has become a big deal over the past few years, especially with the production of the movie Love Jones. And so then after that movie, then all of a sudden all these coffee houses started popping up everywhere, and poetry is being done even on the south side of Chicago, the north side, downtown, anywhere you go, all over the country. Poetry has become a big deal. And then you got Russell Simmons and what he's doing with Def Poetry Jam is taking it to another level. And but poetry has been around for a long, long time. And there's a young woman by the name of Naima Dawson who wrote a play that is really a play which is a fusion of spoken word and theater. It's a play that incorporates poetry, and she talks about through the script how poetry has been around even since the Bible times. If you read the book of Psalms, it's poetry. If you think about how slaves got through during it, when they picked cotton, they recited, they chanted, it was poetry. If you think about music and how black people, I mean, I don't want to say escape, but somewhat we escape through music. We put our troubles down through music. Like, you know, when I talk about, in the poem I just did, If I Cannot Be Black, about Marvin Gaye, I grew up on Marvin Gaye and Aretha Franklin, and people look at it and say, oh, you know, the blues and things like that, that's sad. There's nothing sad in the blues. It's a, you know, they say a dose of the same thing is the cure, you know, and so we escape through music. And so poetry is more than just roses are red and violets are blue. Poetry is music. It's hip hop. It's in rap music. It's they call it rap music now. And I just recently saw the Def Poetry Jam on stage here in Chicago at the Shubert Theater. And one part of it, they say that they used to call it poetry. Now they call it rap. Well, it's just done to a beat. So I guess I want to do this poem. It's called The Last Poets, and what it does is pay tribute to the last poets and the poets of the 70s. Oh, yeah, of course. Who doesn't know the last poets? Whoever don't know the last poets needs to know the last poets.
Right.
So, but it talks about, you know, really the disconnection between the generations and how really it was only a continuation between the generations when hip-hop came about, and that even, you know, hip-hop has been ridiculed for some of the vulgarity of it, but really it's an expression of young people doing poetry. And the poem goes, the last poets were not the last poets. Much respect due and given, but poetry didn't end in the 70s. No, it didn't. It was just beginning. The hip-hop era. Some older folks were saying it was hysteria, but in the 80s it got crazy. They were trying to put poetry in a hearse. The real poets are dead, they said. Then Chuck D emerged with Night of the Living Bassheads, and when Rakim spoke, You hung on this every verse. Then someone heard a curse word and said, that's not poetry. But there are no limitations to rhyme pattern or subject matter. It's about the way your use of words flatter. The audience you aim to reach sees poetry when you inspire and teach, whether it's done over a wooden drum or a drum machine beat, in a classroom or in the streets. Whether you write about being in love or your beef with Uncle Sam, you can't tell me battles over beatboxes weren't poetry slams. MC Light's poems were tight, I mean she could flow with any man, same as Sonia Sanchez and Nikki Giovanni. Then KRS-One came through with his philosophy, just as profound as Mahatma Gandhi. See, I was 9 when poetry found me, and it was wearing a Adidas suit and untied shoelaces. MCs practicing in basements, and I would pause and rewind the tape because I could relate to where they was coming from. Then someone heard a curse word and said, that's not poetry. But they're sadly mistaken, see, because poetry was meant to awaken, so it may take you out of your comfort zone. A poem may not always be about the birds and the trees. It's about where you come from. So you may not notice the birds and the trees because you're distracted by crack fiends and injustice. So your poems may not speak of poetic justice, just reality and that cap on your salary. See, when you're black, you may not be concerned with why the sky is blue, but with how you're getting through. So like LL, you yell rock the bells and mama said knock you out and you shout fight the power. Your poem may be about the concrete instead of the blooming flower, but it's still poetry. So don't judge a poem by its cover. It just might come inside an album cover with a DJ behind an MC wearing a big gold chain. See, Tupac's poetry wasn't about the freshness of the rain. It was about his pain, but it was still poetry. A poem may not come from someone who looks like Robert Frost. It may come from a brother like Nas bearing just one mic, and he might be saving a loss. So the last poets were not the last poets because they inspired the next generation to put poetry in the streets, whether it's done over a wooden drum or a drum machine beat. And that's that piece.
You know, when you think about what you're saying about poetry and its origin, you reminded me of Kalan Phil-Karan, who is a master musician, so many things, but and a powerful researcher. And he said that he is convinced that African people sang in the beginning, that we did not talk, we sang. And this whole notion of rhythm, you see, I paid a particular attention to that when I was a teacher in elementary school. And in order to teach children how to pronounce new words, you would divide them into syllables. And you looked at the dictionary and saw how the dictionary divided the word, and you recognized that black people did not divide their words into these staccato, sharp, crisp syllables, but there were glides in between the segments of a word. And so we spoke rhythmically, and we were taught, or at least I learned, that the literature referred to our speech as sing-song speech, sort of like whining, and they use exaggerated caricatures like step and fetch it to make us ashamed of this tendency of ours to sing rather than to speak, because we were such pitiful characters when we said, Massa, we sick. But the whole point is rhythm was our strong suit, and improvisation was our strong suit. We made a way out of no way, and we did the same thing with every resource we had with words. We made a way out of no way. We made a way to be happy. So our earliest poets were called griots.
That's right.
They were the wise people among us who were eloquent in their speech and who told us what our history was in ways that were entertaining and that helped us to remember. And so we have come through that tradition from the griot into the poet, into the rap artist, but we're the same people.
That's right. That's where Sesame Street got it from. That's right.
The same people. We are the same people doing the same thing, inspiring, instructing, teaching. I think we could do with less of the debasing. I don't particularly like to hear women referred to as all these names and body parts. I don't particularly like so much emphasis on what we are not,
That's right.
because there's so much. If we just dug a little bit, there's so much of our history to tell that by the time we got through telling all of the things that we have achieved and the things that we have transcended, that we probably wouldn't get to the bitches and the hoes.
That's right.
You know? So in all fairness, we ought to do the work. You know, we ought to tell the story from beginning to end. We ought to begin with our greatness and end with our greatness, and maybe in between we may have to talk about our descent, you know, into hell. But then there ought to be resurrection in these poets,
right.
in this poetry. So
I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things, and speaking of spoken word as being a form of media, we know that, and through my poetry, I try, because when I first came on the poetry scene, I was noticing like a lot of like brothers were getting on the mic dogging the sisters, you know, and the sisters was getting on the mic dogging the brothers. So I, you know, I challenged myself to do poetry that would only uplift black men if I was going to get on the mic and speak about black men. And in doing that, I wrote a piece called "Ain't Nothing Like a Brother," and it goes, "Have you ever noticed the way a black man stands, and when he's talking to you, how he puts one fist in his hand, and when he walks as if he's moving to the rhythm of some band, with the grace of a panther, but with the authority of a colonel in command. Not a dime in his pocket, but he'll make you think he owns the world. Girl, ain't nothing like a brother. Have you ever watched a brother who sees a sister he wants to get to know? Watch how he checks her out, completely and slow, rubbing his chin, leaning sideways in his chair with his eyes real low. You know. And what about that brother who walks into a room and he's with his girlfriend or some girl he's just dating? You say to the sister next to you, she better hold on to him before he gets taken, and we wind up on Ricky Lake. And what about that nonchalant brother that just knows he's the stuff? You know, the one that you ignore, but deep down inside you want to get with? What about that brother that just wasn't no good, but you still crave like a fiend? You know, the one that made you climb out your window when you were 16? You know what I mean. Talking about you gotta love John. See, it was a brother Lauren was talking about when she said the sweetest thing she's ever known. Oh yeah, he'll make you think you've grown, or like a little girl all over again. But who could blame you, child? Look at that brother smile. Full lips stretched across white teeth. Now don't be shallow and notice only his looks. Examine what lies beneath. What a soul he must have to deal with the burden of being a brother man. Biggest threat to the other man. Have you ever watched a brother play basketball or pool? Cool, ain't he? I mean, have you ever watched a brother play basketball or pool, or the brother who wants to be a lawyer and spends all his time in school? Or what about the brother with book knowledge and street knowledge, went to survival school and college? Ain't nothing like a brother with a strong mind, because he makes his own school, because brothers be cool. And you got to give it to a brother, because even though society sticks out his foot just as he is about to pick up speed, see, he trips, but he never falls, because he gets up cool as if nothing's happened at all, even though someone has just shattered his dreams. So the next time someone tells you that black men are dead, you say dead, but refusing to lie down, so he's really not dead. Because everybody knows that if a brother breaks down to cry, a black man, things have got to be bad, or worse. See, he won't cry, instead he'll sing. I don't care what the history books say, brothers were once kings. So when that piece, the reaction I got from that piece was amazing. It was almost like 80% of the black men that heard that poem had never heard a sister speak about a brother in a positive way. And that's when I knew that's what I had to keep doing. And you know, I hope I encourage brothers to do the same when it comes to black women, to speak of black women in a positive way. You know, there's nothing more powerful than getting affirmation from the opposite sex, because we're all in the same struggle. You know, we all share the same story. There's no reason why we should be putting each other down. You know, there's pain and there's history behind that pain. We need to understand the history that's caused that pain and deal with it from that way. But to lash out at each other in negative ways and to, you know, get on the mic or anywhere, if it's in the privacy of our own homes, and speak about each other in derogatory ways, it's saddening. It's one thing to hear, you know, it being done by other people, but when you hear it coming from home, and you hear it coming from you, or someone that looks like you, or looks like your father, or looks like your mother, then it's a totally different, you know, abuse that takes place in terms of the psychological effects behind that. So that's one of the things I try to do when I get on the mic, is anytime I hit the mic, I have a responsibility. It's not just, it's arts and it's fun and it's expression, but there's a responsibility in what we say out of our mouths and what we say in the public, and how we speak to each other.
Because we are one.
That's
you
right.
see, I cannot debase you without debasing myself.
That's right.
And nor can you.
I could talk to you all day. Real wisdom with experience. Yeah.
And so, you know, when a young man debases his sister, he debases himself.
That's right.
Because it is from women that he has come. It is from the womb of a woman that he has sprung forth.
Oh, wow.
And consequently, what are you doing? What are you saying about your mother? And if you're saying that about your mother, you're saying that about yourself. You're saying that about your sister. And you have some real serious problems. But Malcolm taught us that one of the worst things we ever learned was to hate ourselves. And consequently, we see that self-hate, you know, poisoning and corrupting our most creative efforts, mainly because it is rewarded by this society. You know, that's one of the mechanisms by which blacks are kept, quote, in their place, is that they never regard themselves as a unit, as they never see what happens to the least of these happens also unto me. And so
But they wave that American dream in front of our faces and hypnotized by it.
Right, right. So, you know, at some point when I look at my children and I see them so lost, I realize that they are in part lost because we did not take them, we did not embrace them and teach them so well that when they began to hear the lies, when people moved forward to corrupt them, that they had their armor, that they were insulated and they were armored. Because otherwise, they will believe what the media tells them. It's really unfortunate that so many of our children spend so much time in front of television sets, because there's not a lot. I don't care whether you have something on your roof or a little box on top of your television. There aren't enough channels that have enough positive things about any people, human beings, for them to be able to spend hours and hours like that. And it's quite possible for parents to do programming for their children by simply videotaping and recording those things that our children need to have reinforced in their lives.
That's right.
And or watching with them so that when these lies turn up, you can stop and correct those things before they're internalized by the children and can't be turned back.
That's right.
So,
well, there's one thing that they can't put on TV, and technology can't change, and that's the spoken word. A computer will never be able to create a poem, and that's the beauty of it.
And then, of course, the fact that it is improvisation very often, that it is created on the spot. You know, I used to say that the Righteous Brothers could never duplicate Ray Charles.
Oh, no.
Because Ray Charles first had to sing the song before they could know what the song would sound like if Ray Charles sang it. So first of all, in order for the computer to do anything, it would have to, a human being would have to do it first.
That's right.
And then it could mimic it. I was playing the best of Ray Charles, an anthology of his music. Ray Charles was fun. When you said blues was not all unhappy, when I think about John Lee Hooker and Hold It, when I think about Green Onions, when I think about Ray Charles, You Are My Sunshine, I said that is not the same song. The same lyrics, he used the lyrics, but Ray Charles wrote another song. I just dance when I hear some of the songs that he makes. And I love Marvin Gaye. Who could not love Marvin? Who could not love Stevie Wonder?
Oh, yeah.
Who could not love Duke Ellington? You know, who could not, they're just Johnny Hartman, you know, who could not love Nancy Wilson? We could spend days, weeks at a time just listening to our music.
That's right.
You know?
Sometimes we do.
Because we have been blessed that the creative spark in ourselves has never been extinguished.
That's
It
right.
keeps coming back.
It can't go away.
It can't go away
It
because
can't.
we need it. When we cease to create, we will be a dead people.
That's
We
right.
will not. We cannot live in isolation, and we cannot live a static existence. Not even a predictable existence. Have to have. We have to have things that we can anticipate, things that we can make, experiences that we can create, and things about which we can sing and write and dance and talk. You know,
That's right.
I'm glad that you pursued this. I wrote a little poetry, but then I just somehow thought poetry was something that everybody did from time to time. I think almost anyone can compose. Few people do, and few people share because they don't really see what they create as being valuable. So you were lucky that your teacher encouraged you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Do you have another poem that you'd like to share?
Well, I was thinking about a poem where you were talking about the fact that when black men degrade black women, they degrade their mothers, and that they come from the womb of black women, so there's no way that they could even imagine, degrading black women and not be a reflection on themselves. And actually, it also speaks to the oral history of it's what I had in mind when I wrote the piece, and it's called I Know Your Story. And it goes, once upon a time, there was a black man, first name black and last name man, because some say that he was black first and the man last. Well, black man didn't live like the king he was, but according to his history, he was a king. See, the problem was when the history books were recorded, he was left out, and so his story went untold. His story was not history, so he went through life not knowing who he was. Well, he kind of knew, but he wasn't too secure with it, and so he lied. He put on his shirt and tie and he lied to himself and everyone around him. But when he tried to tell the truth, when he tried to convince the world that he was the original man and had been denied his respect, no one believed him. In fact, they laughed at his foolishness. And he looked in the history books on the Civil War and World War II, his picture wasn't there, even though he still had scars from the battle. He couldn't take this thing to court. He couldn't prove his bloodshed. There was no trail left. Oh, there was a trail, but as he crawled his way out of captivity, it was as if someone was right behind him, wiping away every drop of blood he left. So this black man became discouraged because he had no so-called evidence. And who would testify? That black man was foolish. Not for believing that he had a case and that he was the original man and had been enslaved and so forth. He was a fool in that he was searching in all the wrong places. He did have a witness, and her name was Black Woman. First name black and last name woman, because some say that she was black first and a woman last. And so she came forth and she spoke on his behalf. And she said to him, I know your story. I know what you go through in this society, so brother, you ain't got a lot of me. Because I've been there since once upon a time. I was there when the doctor first smacked your black behind. I'm your mother. I'm your sister. And I'm your wife if you love yourself enough to choose me. And brother, when you use me or bruise me, you defeat your entire purpose, because you bite the hand that not only feeds you, but the one that gave you life. See, I know your story, the truth and the lies, because I've been watching you since once upon a time, and although I've been a witness, nobody ever asked me to testify. But if the statute of limitations ain't up after 400 some odd years of confusion, I want to speak on your behalf. I want to silence those who laugh, because I was there. When you were being beaten until you could not see, I was looking out of the window crying for you, but also crying because those same men were raping me. I was in those cotton fields. I was on that boat trip. Not only was I there suffering like you, I also had a child on my hip. So I know that sometimes, like Marvin Gaye say, you want to throw up both your hands the way they do your life when it's more than you can bear. Well, brother, your life is what I gave, and so my hands stay in the air. You won't dare show it, but you suffer, and I know it. I know you, so you don't have to hide behind that car, because once you park that BMW, there you are. You can run, but you can't hide. You won't get too far, just to another stop sign. I know your story. It has more chapters than what they tell of on the evening news. You've got more than a record of robbery. You've got a record of slavery. You've been draped in chains, not just the county blues. I know that you didn't just start down with gang banging. Since slavery, you've been asked, what's that you claiming? Since slavery, so I know of your bravery. I know that your battles go as far back as the Civil War and beyond. I overheard the conversation. You were told that you would earn your freedom if you helped save the nation. earn your freedom. So you fought. You fought long and hard until you passed out from either exhaustion or death. But you fought for dignity because for nothing less than freedom would you settle. And after it was all over, they gave someone else the medal. And after all that bloodshed, there's still a war going on today. And the main target is the ghetto. So I know of your disappointment. See, they ran game on me too. They gave me public aid and made me feel I was paid and that I didn't need you. But I do. Because what is wisdom without knowledge? See, I don't care how many years we spend in college, there will never be an understanding. See, the truth is hard to face alone, but together we can withstand it. I hold the truth to your history, not between my legs, but between my ears. Your story does not lie in those history books, but in my tears. I'm a witness. I was there. I know that life ain't fair. I suffer because I don't have blonde hair. And sometimes even you find beauty elsewhere. So it's kind of hard for me to keep my head up if you're a part of the setup of this so-called conspiracy, but it's me and you against the world, brother, you and me. And I don't want to be a better half, because if you use simple math, you'll find that 1 + 1 makes 2. See, I was there when they loaded those slave ships. They counted me just like they counted you. So the next time you're in a blind rage and you draw back your mighty fist, remember this. I know your story. I know what you go through in this society, so brother, you don't have to lie to me, because I've been there since once upon a time. I know your story, because your story is mine. That's that piece.
Whew. That's a good piece. That's a good piece. Does it, you could tear up on that? You know, does it touch you somewhere inside when you're reciting that piece? When you start going through the things that the black man has gone through, do you start feeling that pain?
At the moment I wrote the piece, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I feel it every time I write it, but at that moment that I wrote it, when I was inspired to write it,
Mm-hmm.
I was just, it's hard enough being a black woman in this world. And then you look around and you see the black men, where are they? And you ask yourself that question, and when you really look at where they are, they're in the jails, they're in the graveyards. I mean, if you look at Gatlin's Funeral Home on Halsted Street, they have a drive-through window now because there's so many young black men dying. I mean, you can go through a drive-through window and view a black body of a black man as leisurely as you can get an order of fries from McDonald's, and that's a problem. I mean, it's really, really sad. So yes, absolutely. I mean, anytime you start, thinking about the history of, not even the history of young black men. I mean, talking about now in our communities. If you drive down 79th Street, if you down 63rd Street and Roseland, all the way to 47th Street, and you look at our young black men and how lost they are, it's like you can't help but be touched by that. Anybody human has to be touched by that, and it's so important. I think and one of the things that bothers me about today's society is that we want to push slavery under the rug and say it has nothing to do with today. Now, how is that possible? How is it? Is it a coincidence that our young black men we're committing genocide against each other? The slavery has no impact. I mean, slavery is not that far removed as far as our great-great-grandparents.
Here's the problem with it. The problem with it is that there was no such thing as emancipation.
That's right.
You see, to believe that slavery ended is the problem. To deny that it has impact is to believe that it is something that happened in the past, when it is still happening right now. What the difference may be that we don't see chattel slavery. We don't actually see an auction block with naked people standing on it being sold to different slave holders. But if we look closely enough, we can still see this plantation. We can still see that some of us are being sold to corporations, that some of us are, are working for what may appear to be a good wage, but which does not allow us to amass enough wealth to be able to make the major decisions that free people make, like where do your children go to school and what do they learn when they are in school? Where do you live and how do you live? And how do you meet your need for healing? Health care is what they call it, but healing, not just to be able to go to the emergency room or to the doctor and be given drugs, but the actual ability to be cared for and to be cured of whatever it is that besets you, we do not make the major decisions affecting our lives.
That's right.
And consequently, freedom says that that's what free people do. Free people have choices, and free people make choices freely.
That's
You
right.
see, and when you think about it, every day of our lives, black men and black women, it is as though the night before someone went to the chalkboard and erased everything that you did. And the next morning you wake up with a brand new chalkboard. You never, in all these hundreds of years of serving in this society, of in fact building it, in all these hundreds of years, you have never earned enough credit to be able to cash in on what the work, the labor that you have provided, not to mention the creativity that you have given to this nation. And so when you realize, when you look at black men in particular, because black men have to maintain a certain forbearance. Women are permitted to say, I'm tired, I'm weak, we're permitted to cry and to express impotence. Black men can't do that. So they have to pretend like it's cool. No matter what's happening, it's cool. When you look at what it must take to create a life, every day, to create a life, to create your own self-esteem, to look at a brother walk, his self-esteem is still intact. Brothers do not limp. Every brother has his signature walk, and whether he's walking in to the food stamp office or whatever, if he's in prison with his foot shackled to another brother.
That's right.
There is still pride in himself. But to have to create a life a day is both a curse and a blessing. Because when you can create a life a day, that means that you can always create a different future, So you're not consigned to keep creating the same life over again. You don't have to keep creating the slave life. You can begin to create the life of mastery. You're not seeking to be master over anybody else, just master over yourself. Just getting yourself together so that you can make some decisions about how your progeny will live, So I think it's important that we stress the fact that we need to put less emphasis on making a living and more on making a life. Because that's what we've had to do, even when we couldn't make a living. Now very many of us cannot. We cannot make a living because there aren't any jobs for us to take. So the only thing that some of us can make is a life, and nobody can prevent us from doing that. And that creativity that enables you to make a life, you see, enables you to define yourself and say, I'm a poet, and I'm a poet who inspires and instructs and teaches like you do.
Wow, I'll take that with me forever. Make a life instead of a living. As if you look at even our most successful black people who are at the height of so-called celebrity, and you think about the fact that no matter how rich we get or how popular we get, if we make a mistake, we're automatically put in our places and everything is magnified. If you look at Kobe Bryant, and not justifying that anybody's innocent or guilty, was the fact that someone like Whitney Houston is and it's known that people in the music business, a lot of people were on drugs. Elvis was on drugs, but Whitney Houston, it's magnified, it's put out there, and as soon as something negative comes out about us, it's automatically, ooh, look at that. They're not perfect. Well, we're not perfect, but we're still human beings, and we deserve fair treatment.
For one thing, it's not always that we made a mistake. See, the mistake is in believing that someone else can define you and that you are dependent on other people for what you need. And so you get to the point at which if you become a celebrity, you believe the press. And then when they decide that they have had enough of you, then they will create a reason to discard
That's
you.
right.
So you don't have it made. How will you have it made?
That's right.
Unless you control your own borders, unless you control your own nation, unless you at least control your own self, you see. So that to forget you are a black man in an environment where blackness is not only not regarded, but it is actually feared. To forget that is a very foolish thing.
That's right.
You see. And when you pointed out that if Michael Jackson had not been black, he could not have earned a dime. You see. But the self-hatred kicked in.
That's
Somebody
right.
wasn't minding the children, and we must mind the children. We had to pay them some mind. Because if we don't pay the children no mind.
I like that, pay 'em mind.
Yeah, that's what the
I
old
like my
folks
grandmother.
used to
That's-
say, yeah. You have to mind the children now, because if we don't mind the children, they will grow into these caricatures of themselves and become cartoons rather than black men and black women.
Well, Michael Jackson has basically showed us physically what self-hatred is. It's going on in all black communities everywhere. Michael Jackson just had the money to show it physically, and it's very, I mean, we could talk about that forever, get into a conversation about that, but I mean, just our celebrities, I think is a good example because of, they're so-called celebrities. They're supposed to be worshipped by society, and then if you look at, I mean, all the headline news now is almost, and we don't even make up a high percentage of celebrity, but we make up a high percentage of the negative coverage on celebrities. And even, I mean, if you think about, I mean, even locally here in Chicago, I was talking to a friend of mine about the E2 incident. And then we were talking about why aren't black people asking, why are these, owners are being charged with 63 counts of murder, 3 for each of the 21 victims. And why is it that no one's asking what happened? Why are they being charged?
Because the media has convinced us that we know what happened and we don't know what happened, and we ought to be asking these questions. We have less than a minute, and I don't want to forget to thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Well, I will have you again. Because you will continue to grow and to develop and have something to say. And where can we go and hear you say something?
Well, I'm all over Chicago, and I will be at performing in a play called And Then There Was Poetry on April 10th at the Duncan YMCA. It's a play written by Naima Dawson, and it's a play that incorporates spoken word with poetry.
All right. So we'll look for you at the Duncan YCA on April the 10th.
Okay.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Tina Battle. Thank you, Wisdom.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for sharing your wisdom.